Have you ever, on a sales situation, sat down or got no-showed by a client, or a late cancellation, a day of cancellation, but somebody that's completely no call, no shows you, and maybe later on down the road you find out it was for some completely unfounded reason? This no call, no show happened because you didn't properly prime the prospect. What is priming? Priming is an attempt to prepare your prospect to receive information and to take apprehension away from the prospect, therefore eliminating potential objections that might come down the sales cycle. Fancy words for preparing your prospect, okay? We want to make sure that before we move from one stage to the next, that our prospect knows exactly what's to come. If we don't do these simple tasks of preparing our prospects, we end up in a situation where our prospect's imagination takes hold, and it creates a lot of fear, doubt, and potentially causes the prospect to no-show you or kick the can down the road and give you the "I want to think about it" type answers, which again, we've talked in many episodes before about kind of being the crucial objections that are almost unovercomable, although we have a great video all about how to avoid the "I want to think about it" objections in general. But that's the key, is to never get it in the first place. And so priming your prospects plants seeds along the way so your prospect is never fearful of the next step. In fact, if they have any fear of the next step, we're unearthing that objection before we ever get to that next step. So if they have a fear of, talking about their expenses, or if they have a fear about bringing statements, if they have a fear about making decisions without their spouse involved, we're unearthing it before we ever get to that stage and preparing them to handle that objection. One of my favorite examples of priming a prospect is, we've all kind of seen these situations arise where we don't have all the decision makers in the room, primarily with, say, husband-wife situations. You walk in and they use their spouse oftentimes as a defense mechanism against moving forward in the sales process. By priming a prospect for a situation where, we're starting that decision-making process, and I know that potentially they might use that objection, what I'll do is I'll plant the seed, I'll prime the prospect to make sure they know that we're moving forward towards that kind of decision-making zone, and now'd be the time for you to get your spouse involved. Would they be involved in a decision like that? And if so, let's make sure they show up into this next appointment. Is that something that you'd be okay with? And oftentimes, if there is an objection there, that's when it starts to come out. And what I'm doing is I'm preempting a future objection that would stall out my sales process altogether. That's one example. There's many examples of these. Another good example of priming a prospect, when we come back together, I'm going to have some solutions available to you. Are there a number of different options that you really want to consider? What are all the different things that you need in order to feel comfortable with a decision like this? What kind of goes into your decision-making process before you make a decision like this? Do you like to have a multitude of examples? Is that something that you like us to solve for you? You can actually have your prospect outline exactly how their ideal closing scenario works. I like to have my husband or wife there. I like to have a few different options. I really like to look through the specific details. I like to get a second opinion on a few different things. If they offer some sort of idea of how they like to be closed, then it's up to you to kind of inspect that a little bit more before you go in and do the work. Before you get in there and provide your final solution, make sure you know exactly how they want to be closed. Priming can take all the guesswork out of the closing process. We want them to be ready to receive the information we're about to give. Priming your prospects make sure that you have a smooth process and almost guarantees that folks will show up with intent to each step of your sales process. Step by step, ready to go, with the right decision makers and the right information needed to move the sales process along. And so priming becomes a core competency of a good, solid salesperson. Essentially, it is the idea of, I'm going to tell you how I'm going to close you or sell you some sort of product or service without telling you like, hey, this is exactly how I'm going to sell you, right? So for example, if I'm going from one appointment to a next, the best thing to do to make sure that this prospect shows up with the right documents, shows up with intent, is for me to prime them. And a priming might look like, hey, look, we accomplished a lot here today, but what I'm thinking the next step might look like is something like this. And when we do something like this, this is kind of what I expect. We're going to come together. We're going to walk through your particular needs. We're going to do a little bit of an expense analysis. For us to be able to do that, we're going to need to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to need you to bring this statement, that statement, and another statement. Now, I don't want you to get nervous because when I mean making any decisions in an appointment like this, we're just going to try and understand your circumstance as well as possible so that we can start to put a process together or a plan together. Now, if you have somebody else in your life that might be a part of this decision or included in the outcome of any decisions you made, it'd be important for you to include them at this point. Just not because we're going to make any decisions, but because we're going to start to understand all the particular needs. And if they have a say in something like that or a concern in something like that, we want to make sure that voice is heard. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. So when we come back together, this is kind of what the outcome would look like of a good appointment. This is kind of the time frame it would take. And if all goes well, then we'll talk about next steps. And so what I've done there is I've completely outlined what the next appointment looks like. I've also tried to take away any fear of pressure so they know that they're not potentially coming into a situation where they're going to get pressure sold or anything like that. I'm also trying to let them know that if there's any other decision makers in this buying cycle for you, now's the time for them to get on board. And I don't want them to get into a place next appointment where we come in, I'm starting to look through these documents, I'm trying to understand their concerns, and they hit me with a couple of I don't knows. A lot of times we'll find sales folks that haven't properly primed a prospect from one appointment to a next that end up stalling, not losing sales, but stalling their sales cycle out and prolonging it. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're kicking the can down the road and your sales cycle just keeps going and going and going without any sort of commitment, priming is likely the issue. So priming is a super powerful skill as a salesperson. Whether you're in the retirement planning space or any industry, priming your prospects can kind of take the guesswork out of your sales process and keep things moving along. If you enjoy this episode and you like any of the points that we've made throughout, go ahead, throw the video a like. It always helps us. If you have questions or comments or things you might do to prime your prospects, throw it in the comments. That's always a great discussion. We always love to respond back to folks' comments. And then lastly, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so. We got a lot of great videos that come out almost every week about how to be the best salesperson you possibly can be. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. We'll see you next time here on Coffee for Closers. Take care.